Hello, everybody. I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes, and welcome to Gwen's Bookish Ramblings. And today we are looking at one of the authors that uh, really kind of caught me in my formative reading years. Um, this is perhaps difficult to read, but the author is Judith Tarr, and this particular book is Pride of Kings. Now, Pride of Kings is not the first Judith Tarr book I ever read. The first of those that I read is actually a trilogy that was all in one book, and so there's every possibility that you're not going to hear about that until I get around to doing the trilogy as a whole. Actually, all 5 books, because there's one trilogy about one character, and then a pair of books about twin brothers, book 1 about one brother and book 2 about the other. The thing is that Judith Tarr is one of those authors, and I've already talked about one of them. Like Linnea Sinclair, although I think genuinely a better author than Linnea Sinclair, she kind of tells the same story over and over again. Now, I will say this with the caveat that I was never really able to get into her series, into her Avarian series. I tried the first book and it just didn't really grab me. What I tended to wind up reading is this series of books that she wrote very consistently, or rather, collection of books that she's written, really with great consistency around the time of Richard Lionheart's Crusades. Some of them take place a little bit before, some of them take place during, some of them take place after, but they all kind of hover right around that mark, and King Richard actually figures in a lot of them. These are historical fantasy novels. If you're not really aware of what historical fantasy is, it kind of does what it says on the tin. It's saying this is a book set in some point in history, we're just pretending magic is also real. Now, some people who do that create a world where magic is a generally accepted as part of the greater population sort of thing. And other books, like this one, or like Mercedes Lackey's Elemental series, magic is underground. It's something that some people have and some people are aware of, and there is a secret society, but much like in Harry Potter, there are people who are into it and people who are not in. Pride of Kings is a story that rehabilitates Prince John. Now, most of us have heard of Prince John in the course of the Robin Hood story. The Robin Hood story traditionally casts Prince John as the villain. That is, you have Robin Hood running around trying to get enough money to bring King Richard back, while Prince John runs roughshod over everybody in his path. We also know Prince John, or rather, by that point, King John, as the man who put in place the Magna Carta. I am somewhat leery of calling him a generous supporter of human rights, because we all know that the Magna Carta was put in place because the barons wanted to press for further independence from the crown, because they didn't really like having to kowtow to somebody who, wasn't like God. Because, I mean, it's one thing to kowtow to priests who can arrange for you to spend your eternity in hell. It's another thing to have to kowtow to a king who, if you just took away his armies, is just a guy. So, in any event, this book, it is at least partially a rehabilitation of Prince John, because John, at the opening of this book, the players that move into position, there is a prologue at the start of this, which sort of sets up who everybody is and what they're doing and why. And the way this is set up is that one is crowned a temporal king of England, of Britain, of what have you, but you also need to be crowned king of the magical realm of Britain. It's a little bit like you can be crowned king, but if the church doesn't accept you, then you don't actually get to be a real king. In this case, it's magical Britain. And the book opens with Richard basically saying he's happy enough being king of the English. He doesn't want to be king of Britain. He is a good Christian, and he's not going to be crowned with pagan mummeries. And so John is then basically thrust into the limelight by magical Britain, by the spirit of the island itself, basically latches onto John as the next in line who will accept the kingship, because being king, a king is required to maintain the strength of the land, the wholeness of the land. This is a concept that you find in Shakespeare's King Lear. In King Lear, when Lear decides he's not going to really be king anymore, he's going to split up his kingdom and enjoy a nice retirement, everything falls apart. And this is the same idea, that the wholeness and the wellness and the strength of the land is not merely symbolically, it is mystically, metaphysically connected to the wellness of the king. And if you do not have a king, then you don't have something that is holding everything together. You don't have somebody who stands in for the land. It's a very, very metaphysical concept, and one that you hear about in a lot of pagan cultures. It's very much the same impetus for a blood sacrifice of a king to bleed over the land, because the king's blood is the land's blood, that the king is the microcosm of the country in macrocosm. And the interesting thing, of course, is that I haven't even gotten to the protagonist of this book. This is called Pride of Kings, and our protagonist is Arslan, which is apparently Turkish for lion. I don't know Turkish, so I couldn't speak to that. But Arslan, who is apparently actually properly named Baldwin of Beausoleil, although given that he's supposed to be French, I would have thought it would be Baudouin, but, I mean, who am I to question Ms. Tarr? And what happens is that he is called by Britain to help the king, that he is called to be the king's helpmeet, to be one of the powers supporting the throne. You have the four guardians, for a very traditional number, four elements, four seasons, four times of day, noon, dusk, midnight, and dawn. Four is a very, very traditional thing, four cardinal directions. But Arslan is called to be something other than one of the guardians, to be the strong magical arm of the king, to be the magical defense of the king, to be John's Lancelot, I suppose you could say, in a lot of ways, that he is supposed to be there to defend and protect and support the king in a way that the guardians can't, because their job is to guard the country specifically. And so this is Arslan's story, and it's his story of how he comes to the country. It's his story of how he gets called to England, how he gets brought to this country that is not his own, because Arslan grew up in the Holy Land. He grew up close to Jerusalem. And when Saladin, Salah al-Din Yusuf ibn Ayyub, when he came, yes, of course, the Crusaders, a decade before, had, taken lands away that had traditionally been lands of people of that region, but that was where he grew up, and when Saladin's forces came through, he got driven out of his home. He was kept captive for a while by Muslims until he was finally let go in an exchange, a prisoner exchange of some kind. And so this is a story of his disappointment that he's not going home, of his having to get used to this country because he is Frankish. He's French. He's not, he's grown up in the Far East. His mother is an Ifrita, which is an Islamic fire spirit. Kind of like the Muslim version of Irish fairy. And his mother is that, and so he's a creature of the Middle East and of France, and England is just completely out of his ken. Britain is out of his ken. He doesn't know why he's being called there. He has no connection to it. But he is called there because he's needed, and this is his story of becoming used to it, of growing up, of learning who he is, and falling in love, and a whole bunch of other things. And the thing about Judith Tarr's books, the language in them, the dialogue, it can be a little stilted. And I don't know how much of that is her attempting to capture the way people would have spoken at the time, and how much of it is the style in which she writes. But it does lend a certain difference, alienness to the way things are spoken that really helps transport you, that helps you see how different things are and how alien and how far away they are. It helps put you into the different frame of mind. And it really, really helps because it helps with, I suppose you could call it magical thinking. It helps with that way of seeing the world that is fundamentally mystical, fundamentally, it's difficult to describe in part because magical thinking, which is a term of art, literarily speaking, it's a very different way of viewing the world, and I find that the formalism of the language, the way that she describes people's worldview, really, it really helps. It helps the reader lock into a world, a place where a country is reliant not merely on soldiers to defend it and farmers to farm and that sort of thing, but on a king to be healthy and well, because when the king is well, the country is well, and when the king is not well, the country is not well. And it's a little bit like voodoo. It's a little bit like voodoo dolls. Somebody steals a bit of your hair, stuffs it into the doll, and then they stab the doll with pins, and you feel like you're being stabbed with ginormous swords because, you know, a pin on a voodoo doll is like a short sword for, you know, a fully sized person. The thing is, it helps with that sort of visceral understanding, and I really do like Judith Tarr. I like this take on Prince John, not as a usurper to the throne, but as somebody who had his own throne that was not the same. It's about making that distinction between England and all of Britain mystically. And I very, very much enjoy, I do love her series of books, and I love that worldview that she has, and I recommend this for people who like a good, solid, straight up fantasy novel. And I think that's all I can say because I'm basically out of time. Thanks for coming, and I will see you next week.